So for those of you who haven't met me before, as Joan was saying, I run a local garden design consultancy. I go around people's backyards and I talk to them about their backyards and what's going on. And at the moment, it's all about fruiting and fruit tree pruning. I'm doing 7 fruit trees on Monday, and then later in the week I'm doing more. So it's big fruit tree time at the moment. And yeah, I get around to all different libraries and bits and pieces. Okay. All right. So that's supposed to say welcome. Welcome. Okay. That's my privilege. Who lives in an apartment? Okay. Who has a lot of pots? That sort of idea. Okay, great. As a lot of you might be aware, we're starting to move into smaller apartments or smaller houses. We have shrinking backyards as well. So this presentation tonight is really about how we can maximise the space and how we can use that. Last week we did a bit of design, a bit of thinking and dreaming around garden design. Today we're going to be talking specifically about productive vertical gardens and what you need to consider. And I think this is relevant to everyone, even if you don't live in an apartment, because we have to think about the microclimates that we've got and where we live and, you know, the situations that are going on. So, okay. All right. So, this is based on the idea of a food forest. Has anyone heard of a food forest? A few of you? Okay, so I'll just explain the concept of a food forest. It's working with nature. It's using nature's systems to maximise your productivity in the garden, and it's working with plants that complement each other and work with each other so that you're not fighting against nature. So a lot of the big agricultural companies, they have these things called monocultures, where they just plant one crop, they use a lot of pesticides in the one crop, they don't think about all the other wildlife, and we've had big discussions about that here, about the bees and the moths and all the other things that are going on in nature. This system, the food forest, very much encourages that to work together. So when we talk about a forest, we've got the overstory layer, which is usually the trees. Then you have the shrub layers. I've got blueberries, feijoa. Then the herbaceous layer, which is your strawberries and your mint layer. Now, what we can do, because we're clever gardeners, is we can take this concept of a productive vertical garden and reduce it down to our gardens and what we have available. The main concept is that they're complementary, that the plants are complementary, that they're going to support each other, that they're going to affect the microclimates around that, whether it's through bringing more shade in or allowing more light in or supporting other plants. For instance, I think we may have spoken about when you grow corn, you can grow beans up corn and multi-use plants, but they're all supporting each other. Okay. So the first thing you need to think about, especially on a balcony and porch situation, is rain shadows. So one of those, it's where the rain comes across, it doesn't hit the plants. And you see this a lot. I feel very sorry when I go to car parks and you see these poor little wasted strappy plants that are just under the awning, and you can tell they're really suffering. Dry shade is one of the hardest things to grow plants into. So if you have any of those rain shadow areas in your garden, is there a way that you can perhaps put irrigation in there, or add some light, maybe add mirrors or bring some other things in there? Or if you think, well, sometimes it can be a bit too hard, you can just look at maybe adding ornaments or a bird bath or something else in those spaces. So the other thing to think about is your balcony, like what's it made of? If it's just, thin struts, or is it concrete, how much can your balcony hold? Or even a veranda, how much can it hold? I go to a lot of people's places and they're just overloaded with pots. They've got so many different pots, and they haven't really thought about the weight-bearing effect on the verandas and, will that survive? Will it be okay? And also your balconies or your porches, verandas should be beautiful. Like the plants out there should encourage you to come out and be not only productive because you can go out and pick them, because we're talking about kitchen gardens here, but just really attractive. So maybe more is less, like maybe less pots or get better pots, and I'll get into the different types of pots in a minute. Also walls, what kind of walls do you have? Do you have brick walls? Are you able to put some screws in the wall, or if not, there's a lot of brackets that you can hang things off walls, or even using sort of pedestals or trellis work or all sorts of things. I don't think we use our walls enough, right? So have a think about what can you hang from your walls. And today we're going to be making a little bit of reuse of recycling and a wall hanging. The other thing with veggies and herbs, they need about six hours or so. They need a lot of sunlight. So if you don't have that, is there somewhere else you can grow them? Is a windowsill that you can put them? Perhaps there's some other ways you can maybe put them in different sections. So it's something to consider because they might not do as well. However, in saying that, in summer, with the heat island effect we've got going on, it's like 20% hotter than it ever used to be. So they can also get blasted. So a nice idea sometimes is to have a bit of shade cloth that you can pull over your herbs and veggies to keep them cool. You really need to be in verandas, porches, balconies. It's a very enclosed kind of artificial space, and the temperatures fluctuate quite a lot. So you need to be aware of that. And also just what aspect does your site have? You know, what are the microclimates? Is it really shady all the time? What's the wind like? Do you get a lot of breezes? Because we know if you ever walk through the CBD with the wind rushing through the buildings, it's really getting quite strong and hitting and can cause some damaging effects. So, what kind of things are going on? So if you're not sure, you haven't been in your house for a while, or you're thinking something different, just observe, okay? So go out there and pay attention. See what's happening. And the great thing about pots is you can move them around. So if your plant's not doing very well in one area, you can try it in a different area. But again, it's good to know your plant and what your plant needs. Okay, so again, this has been scaled down for balcony and smaller gardens. So the overstory layer, so that's the shade, the windbreak, got things like citrus, little apple, dwarf varieties are lovely, mountain marigold, rosemary, rose geraniums. They're sort of compact, smaller type shrubs, so we're not really talking big trees here. And then the shrub layer, obviously Monstera's it's quite big, you might have space for that. Now we were talking before about blueberries because they need a really acidic mix, and how do you know? You can actually get a soil testing kit. It's around about $14. You can get it from Bunnings, and what you do is you get a sample of the potting mix and you put a powder and then a dye on top, and it will change colour. And then you have a little colour chart, and it will tell you whether it's 7 neutral, 8 alkaline, or 6 and 5.5. So you can actually see what the acidity is. And if you've just got a general garden, you'll notice if you do it, you'll get different acidity levels. And same thing with currants as well. And rhubarb and asparagus are great because they're perennials. Anything that you can grow that's a perennial, like the herbs we've got tonight, are all perennials pretty much. They all kind of keep growing as long as you look after them. They're not going to be like an annual, like annual basil that just kind of dies off. These ones, if you look after them, they will keep going for most of the time. So it's good to look at perennials, all right, in your garden. It's going to save you a bit of money. And other things, the herbaceous layer, which is kind of what we're getting in tonight with the Mediterranean herbs. The reason why I've chosen Mediterranean herbs is because they're quite tough. They can deal with a bit of neglect. They like a bit of sun. But overall, they're quite tough. They're not as fragile as, say, coriander, which we were talking about before, which tends to bulk, tends to go to seed. That's why I didn't get any of that for you tonight. And also, you might notice we've got different types of lemon, and there's a variegated oregano. Just get this one up here. There's a lot of different varieties in the herbs, just the standard Mediterranean herbs. So why not have a go at trying to grow something a bit different? French sorrel is a good one if you've got a bit of shade. It's like a lettuce leaf kind of plant. and it's got a real sharp flavour. I mean, you add it to salads and other things, and it's really great. And also strawberries. Strawberries are always a really nice one just to have around, and they work really well in pots. Usually they get attacked by snails and things, but in pots they're great. Okay. So here are just some very easy little flowers that you can grow. The salvias are great. I think I showed that before. The lavender, carrots, nasturtiums, thyme. So you can put those out and they will encourage the bees, because you need to encourage the bees into the garden. All right. I did speak about encouraging the bees before, but it's really important to make it attractive. So you might start with your herbs tonight as a bit of a beginner, and then you might want to move on to adding a bit of colour. Certainly flowers are a great way to bring that in. And these kind of flowers, like thyme, is multi-use, because obviously you use it in cooking and it's also got flowers. Lavender has heaps of different varieties, so you can choose which one you love. And it's very calming in teas and other things, so multi-use. Nasturtiums are a sacrificial plant, but you can also eat them. Carrots, obviously carrots, but also they encourage the pollinators, and salvia is just great, and it keeps flowering and supports the bees. Right? So when you look at your gardening books as well, just have a note about what they do and the climate they like. And just be careful with gardening kitchen books. Are they Australian or are they European? Because sometimes you can get thrown and think, oh yeah, I can grow that, that'll be okay. But sometimes the instructions, or they're back to front because they're European. So you just have to make sure that whatever you're looking at is information for our climate. All right, so choosing the right container. So for those of you who have glazed pots, and I love glazed pots too, they definitely don't dry out as much as terracotta, but they can be really heavy to move. And even if you don't have a veranda or a porch, it's a good idea to put them on coasters that you can move around so you're not hurting your back. The ideal shape for a pot, by the way, is those terracotta pots that are kind of wide and narrow, that actually allows the root system of your plants to grow the best. So just keep that in mind. Whereas shallow ones, unless it's a shallow rooting plant, don't tend to do as well. The terracotta pots obviously dry out quite quickly, but if you're planting a citrus or maybe some herbs, you should be fine, because again, Mediterranean or citrus, they don't mind it drying out a little bit, so that's okay. And they're lighter than the glazed pots. The black plastic pots, again, they're going to be light, but they are black. They will capture the sun. They can heat up quite quickly. Also, they can crack. But they have a use, don't just discount them. They have a use. Just think about what you want to grow in them. Maybe later on you're going to move them to something else. Just have a critical look at the pots you've got. What are in good condition? What do you need to sort of use differently, or what would you like to bring in? Now, tonight we're doing a bit of the recycled containers. So these are all sparkling mineral water and tonic water bottles. So I had a little gin and tonics to do tonight. Yep. And they're really good because this kind of plastic, it's fairly light, and it also lets in the light. It's long enough so it's going to allow your herbs to grow quite nicely. Now I have put drainage holes in them at the bottom as well, so they should have a few little drainage holes. You don't want a lot because the water will pour out, but when we get to the activity bit, I'll talk a bit more about that bit. But you need to add the drainage holes. Now, if you're going to do any other recycling containers, and I do encourage you to do that, to use recycling containers. What else can we do with them? What else can we grow in them? Those are cans. You can use cups or other types of bottles. How can you reuse them and cut them up and do whatever you need to do so that we can reuse them, so they're not just going to landfill? Pellets, I spoke a bit about that last time with pellets. If you're going to use them, there's a little bit of research you need to make sure you get heat-treated pellets, HT, they should say that on it, because that means that the wood's been especially heat-treated, whereas chemically treated has arsenic and other cyanide they use in the manufacturing process. So you really want to avoid those, especially if you're going to grow herbs, edibles. But with pellets as well, you'll need to do a little bit of construction work. So how good are you with skills and hammers, and if you don't feel comfortable with that, that might not be the thing for you. But if you like that sort of DIY thing, have a go, definitely. You'll need to take out some of the slats, and you need to fill it with a thing called geotextile, which is a type of weed protective plastic. It's quite thick, and it will hold the moisture and the potting mix in there. And I've seen people paint them and put beautiful designs on them. They can look fantastic. But again, pellets aren't going to last that long. That's the other thing you've got to consider. If we're talking about a food forest type situation, we're talking longevity, where you want it to last maybe 4 or 5 years. Pellets might not last as long as that. Okay, they might just be a kind of one-off couple of years, and then they might have to try something else. So really think about longevity and how long you want to work with things. Now, there's lots of different nifty vertical hangers and all sorts that you can go out there and buy. My word of advice to you would be, think about the size of the plant that you're buying, how big it's going to get when it gets mature. If it's hanging vertically at the top, plants are more likely to get the water than the bottom plants. And also, how are you watering it? Have you thought about that? Because it can be quite a lot of work to water. I see these kind of planter beds, sometimes with the plastic, longer planter beds, they seem to crack and don't do as well. So you might just want to rethink that and maybe try something different. Okay, so maybe have a look at what's out there, consider what you want to grow, the weight of it, what it's going to look like, where it's going to be. So there's quite a few things to consider when you're putting all your pots and trellises and things together. But most of all, make it look attractive, make it look really nice. When something's run its course, like for instance lettuce, take it out, replenish the potting mix, and go again. Don't just leave it there. A lot of people kind of think, oh, there's a little bit left, I'm not sure about it. As part of being a gardener, we've got to get used to sort of working with things, replacing things. Things will die. That's just part of gardening. And then you look at composting or replacing or that sort of thing, okay? Especially with edible plants, they're always changing. Okay, potting mix. So potting mix is quite interesting. So I just wanted to get into that because some of you may have gone to the supermarket and you see they have sometimes little herbs and things growing in a strange sort of substance. It's not soil. I think, what is that? There's a thing called perlite. It's a volcanic rock. It's quite light, and they mix it through the potting mix to make it light and fluffy. I think florists use it a bit too. You have to be careful if you're using perlite because the dust isn't good for us if you buy a bag of it. All right, so I tend to find I wet these things down and I wear a mask, and that should, with those sorts of things, you should be careful. Vermiculite, which is a silicate. Again, you see it a lot in little plants that you buy from the supermarket and other nurseries and other places. They're just like a starter. They're a starter mix. So it's got calcium, magnesium. It adds wetness to the soil. So if it's something that perhaps you're going to leave around for a while, you don't want to use the water crystals, that might be a good choice to grab. Peat moss as well. I got some peat moss the other day. It's quite sort of soft and breaks up quite easily. You can add that to the potting mix. It makes it a bit more acidic, but it also holds the moisture. So you can actually have a go at making your own potting mix. And the reason why I'm talking about this tonight, we're talking about food forests and longevity and wanting things to stay in a pot for a long while, rather than going out and just buying a pot of just standard potting mix. You might want to add some of these things in there. Never use soil. Straight soil will not work in your pots. It will compact. It will not be good for your root system. You always want to use a potting mix, and you can certainly add things to it, but just keep that in mind. Sand we use when we're doing seed raising as well. When we were doing the seed raising one, that makes sure that the water drains really nicely. Just be careful if you are going to use it for seed raising, your seedlings. You don't want to use builder's sand. builder sand's a bit too fine, it clogs up. You want to use like a river sand type thing. Limestone. Limestone, that's if you've got a really acidic sort of potting mix, you'd add that in. I don't think people tend to use that one so much. The core fibre is, you see that they're kind of this raspy Hessian look in some of the hanging baskets. They tend to use it overseas quite a bit. I always look at that and think, well, that's not going to hold very much moisture. It's going to be quite open and things are going to kind of fall through. So it does look nice when it's in some hanging baskets, but just be aware you might have to add some of that geotextile or some of more potting mix or something else to hold it, because I tend to see the core fibre doesn't seem to last that long. Depends on the look you want to go for. Now, if you're going away, you might want to use water crystals. So water crystals come as little hard stones, and then you add water and they turn into a gel. You need to mix them through the potting mix, and then they'll suck that up and the root system of your plants will take it up. However, it doesn't last that long. So it maybe lasts about the actual crystals maybe 3-4 months, and then they kind of degrade. So they're good for starting things, but then, maybe something would be better to add like peat moss, something like that to keep it a bit wetter rather than just water crystals. Now, be careful with over watering your potting mix. I can speak from experience, and I'm sure we've all done it, especially if they're sort of inside, because you can get other little gnats and midges and things that get into your potting mix, and that's not particularly nice. So one really simple way of testing whether it's dry or not is actually to put your finger in and you can feel whether it's moist or if it's dry. Now, potting mix should always be moist and not saturated, not flooded with water. And I've mentioned about the soil, because, there can be things like weeds. Not good. Okay, so watering. Watering is really important in pots. Everything in pots is 2-3 times the attention than anything else in the soil. So if you're going away a lot, you're very busy, it might be worthwhile setting up some sort of irrigation system, and there's a lot of different choices out there. Just make sure if you're going for a drip irrigation system that you test it and make sure that where the water drips, it drips directly onto the root system. It doesn't drip over here, it's right where the roots are. And sometimes if, say, you're doing this in a garden, you actually dig up the soil and see how wet it is. Because some people, they forget where things are in the garden and, they move things around, and then the plant's actually not getting any benefit from it. And particularly in pots as well, you have to be really careful where the irrigation system, where the drip system is working. The other thing that you can consider is a slow release fertilizer. Now, I think I might have mentioned a bit about this, but with fertilisers, so anything that's like manure or osmocote pellets take about 4 months to break down. Anything that's liquid takes about 2 weeks. And if you use a foliar spray directly on the leaves, that takes about a day or 2. So it's good to keep that in mind depending on what's going on. I mean, they're all fine, it's just you have to work out what your plant needs. If you're doing a food forest as well, it's important that you consider the time frame, because it can take a while for plants to get established and get used to your environment when they have to live in this environment the whole time. And keep trimming your plants to size. I had a guy a couple of weeks ago, and he had, it was like big citrus, and he hadn't kept it quite small, it was getting bigger and bigger, and he had roots coming out the bottom. Well, that's never a good sign when you've got roots coming out the bottom of your pot. It basically means it's gotten too big for the pot, but he could have kept it small by trimming it. If you trim them, then the root system will shrink to meet the canopy, right? So you can keep them quite compact and small, and then, it will be a better size for you to maintain and look after. And just watch with potting mix, some of the cheap stuff that have fungicides and all sorts of things in it. I don't know if any of you heard about recently one of the nurseries, they had some contaminated potting mix and soils and things going on. So just be careful with your potting mix, make sure you get it from a reputable place and it's good quality potting mix. All right. Now, just be aware, again, on balconies and things that you will still have pests and bugs. It doesn't matter how tall, how big or high or up you are with your sort of your plants. But green lacewing, I like to point this one out because the eggs are tiny and they look like little white dots, and you usually see them on bicycles or on doors, and people go, oh, what's that? And they wipe them off, and they're actually really positive, good bugs to have around. They eat all your aphids. They're really great. And of course, the ladybirds as well. Please make sure that you're not killing your ladybirds. And your juvenile ladybirds as well. That's what they look like. They look scary, but they eat a lot of aphids, so they're fantastic to have. Just let them do their thing. Now with the pests, I think in sort of balcony gardens or pots, you usually find that aphids attack things quite quickly. They seem to be one of the main pests around. So they're quite easy to get rid of. You can wipe them with a rag and you should get onto them straight away because they can not only have live young, they can clone themselves. So they're just, they're not great. And also ants spread them as well. So if you see ants on anything, just watch that. Mealybugs also climb up and attack like little citrus and apples, and I've seen them on stocking plants as well. They just seem to go for anything that's weak. And they get into the crevices and they're horrible and they turn your plant yellow. So again, if you're encouraging the ladybirds that are coming in, or you can use some horticultural soap and keep them under control. Okay. The praying mantises are always fantastic to have. I actually was going to see a client on Wednesday. I had one on the car. It wanted to come with me. I had to rescue it. I had to put it on the nature strip because they're fantastic. And so someone else got benefit of my ecosystem going on in my garden. Hoverflies are quite amazing. They disguise themselves as wasps, so they won't get eaten. So just have a close look at that banding. They have this kind of black and yellow banding, but they're actually really positive for the garden. You mostly see them in spring, and they will eat a whole lot of aphids and other pests for you. The whitefly is really bad on tomatoes and beans this year. They have little proboscis that stick into the leaves, and they suck the chlorophyll out and spread viruses and diseases. So you can use garlic or chili sprays, pyrethrum, or vacuum clean them off. Just shake your plants. You'll see the little white flies. You shake them, and they'll sort of they'll get sort of sucked up by the vacuum cleaner, or just you can hose them down. They won't like it. Cabbage moth. I'm still seeing a few cabbage moths around at the moment. I don't know if you are, which is a bit disappointing because I put in my brassicas, I put in my my kale and things. But if you do see them, make sure that you're getting rid of them because they're planting their eggs. They'll be planting caterpillars on your brassicas. So some people think they're butterflies. That's why the reason why I put up a photo, so you know, no, they're a pest. They're really bad at spring. Okay, cool. So there's just some further information about edible balconies if you're interested in. Obviously, we're in a library as well, so you can go and borrow some books. And Joe's got some wonderful books over there for you all to have a look at.